Proverbs 17:25. A foolish son is a grief to his father, and bitterness to her who bore him. Also, to punish the righteous is not good, nor to strike princes for their uprightness. He who has knowledge spares his words, and a man of understanding is of calm spirit. Even a fool is counted wise when he holds his peace. When he shuts his lips, he's considered perceptive. So, Lord, we thank you for our time in your word. We pray now that you would minister to our hearts. You would equip our hearts for works of service. And Lord, you would answer questions. You would challenge, rebuke. You would correct. Lord, you would do all that you intend to do, Lord, in this time as we study this passage, Lord, that we believe has been set apart for our edification this day. So we want to receive it as your children, knowing, Lord, that you have prepared it in advance for us to receive it today. We thank you for the opportunity to see what you have for us, and we pray, God, it would be a blessing to us as we study together. In Jesus' name, everybody agreeing, saying, Amen. You may be seated. We have discovered thus far that God's wisdom is found everywhere and applicable to our actions, thoughts, and deeds. Every part of our lives is meant to be touched by wisdom. God's wisdom is concerned with how we react to the world around us and how we interact with one another. As we enter chapter 17, Solomon seems to have the family unit in mind as he directs his son toward wisdom. He wants us to ask, how does wisdom direct our actions in the home? What will she cause us to value in terms of our family relationships, in terms of the way we respond with one another? We'll find out a lot here, and we'll gather much as we move through this chapter. Open now to verse 1. Better is a dry morsel with quietness than a house full of feasting with strife. A wise servant will rule over a son who causes shame, and will share an inheritance among the brothers. The refining pot is for silver, and the furnace for gold, but the Lord tests the hearts. An evildoer gives heed to false lips. A liar listens eagerly to a spiteful tongue. He who mocks the poor reproaches his maker. He who is glad at calamity will not go unpunished. Have you ever had a stale piece of bread? Would you ever prefer that over a royal feast? You would if it meant peace in your home. There's no way to estimate how much that matters as we walk in this world. The longer you live, the greater you long for peace to reign. As I think about this passage, it speaks to us, I feel, on many multiple layers. First, believers are far more easy to satisfy than their unbelieving counterparts. We truly can eat a dry morsel with a smile if we're at peace with God and our fellow men. Second, there's no amount of material that one can buy that will mask contention. You can have all the best of everything, and if you have strife with God and with your fellow men, people you care for, there is nothing you can buy that will mask that. If you're not devoted to making peace, to looking at your own behavior and settling it with those of your household, you'll never have enough to escape. Jesus tells us in the Sermon on the Mount, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be sons of God. What an important thing for us to embody that in this verse. In verse 2, Solomon lays out this interesting warning to his and everyone else's sons. A wise servant will rule over a son who causes shame. Wisdom demands to be rewarded. Character outweighs status in the eyes of God. In the course of his life, Rehoboam, Solomon's son, found this out the hard way when this proverb was applied to him. Jeroboam had been one of Solomon's servants when God offered the 10 northern tribes to him as a correction against Solomon's idolatry. That's 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 29 through 39. Rehoboam still had the chance to rule over Judah and Benjamin, the two southern tribes, but because of his foolish decisions to follow poor counsel, Rehoboam surrendered most of his inheritance to Jeroboam, the slave. God rewards wisdom. Sadly, Jeroboam would later surrender his own inheritance, what God gave to him by his own failure to trust God. In that way, Jeroboam was a living illustration that wisdom must be maintained in the fear of the Lord. In other words, when you get wisdom, it doesn't automatically mean that you're going to operate in wisdom all your life. I think that's a big thing for the church to understand. You cannot live on what you once were. You live on what you are, and what you will be is made by the choices that you make today. Jeroboam was given a great blessing, but he squandered it in the fear of men. And it crushed the 10 northern tribes. What is he saying about all this? None should ever think themselves entitled because of their privileged relationships or their past accomplishments if their present activities are disgraceful. Our actions have consequences, and our current lives right now are the testing ground upon which the Lord proves authenticity. So he talks about silver and gold. When you wanted to purify silver, you would put it into a refiner's pot. In older translations, you'd find the word crucible, which was a metal container that could be heated up to extreme temperatures in order that impurities would separate from the silver. A similar principle would be used for gold. You'd heat up the furnace to an extreme temperature, and you place your gold inside, and when you're finished, nothing but pure gold remains. Well, God is doing the same thing with you and I to bear forth character. He's allowing the fire of trials to wear off the impurities of our lives in order that we might come through as gold. So whatever fire you find yourself in now is the testing ground from God to you, in which he examines our hearts and exposes what is there. At issue is whether or not you trust him or you trust yourself. Will you believe his word and his truth, or will you buy the lie? Now guess what? God already knows what's in our hearts. He already knows what's... The thing we don't understand is what we are. We don't know what we're capable of. Because when everything's good, we all say how great we are and what a gift we are to God, how lucky he is to have us, how wise he is to have chosen us over all those wretched heathens out there. But then when you turn up the heat, he exposes what's actually there. And we learn what it is that's gone on, what it is we're really about. That's what the test shows us. Imagine this. You believe yourself to be godly, but you're consistently giving into the lies of the enemy. That's what trials show. And notice this, an evildoer gives heed to false lips. If you reject God's truth for the lies of the enemy, that's the exact definition of a person who does evil. You're a liar if you can't wait to hear someone speak spitefully about another. Do these words not echo the sentiment of the Apostle John, who wrote, "How can you say that you love God, who you have not seen, when you don't love the brother that you have?" 1 John 4, verse 20. I heard a great challenge this week from a famed preacher who offered this to any person who would come up to him with a juicy piece of information on another congregant. He could tell that person every time, he says, "Can I quote you on that?" I thought that was a great idea. Someone brings something about you to me. I want to say, "Can I quote you on that?" In other words, I'm feeling free to tell this person what you just said. That'll nip everything in the bud. That kind of talk dies quickly when that's our response. We should never desire to hear a poor report on another person. That should never be our heart. We don't want to be the people that are waiting for the other shoe to drop in someone's life. That shouldn't be our hearts. And then verse 5 really hits the nail on the head for us as a test of our character. If you mock the poor, you're insulting the Lord, the maker of the person who is destitute. I remind you, when Jesus took on human flesh, he was not raised in the palaces of Jerusalem. He was raised by a poor family in one of the poorest cities in Israel. Nazareth was what small towns call small. It was one of the B towns. It would be like Brawley, which is like one street. You just go through and you're past it. Or Blythe. Any town with a B name, it's over. It's small. That's just the way it is here in California. Nazareth should have been Bazareth, but it was a very small town. Let's just say that. How do we know that they were poor? When Jesus was taken to the temple by his parents, they offered the sacrifice of the poor when they offered 2 turtle doves. Luke 2:28, Leviticus 12, verse 8. Jesus, the high King of heaven, the one for whom all of heaven and earth exist, chose to live a life of poverty. He identified with the ones who had nothing at all to show the way to everything in himself. Nobody would ever mock Jesus, and none should ever celebrate another's downfall. Who could be glad at someone's disaster? What does that say about you? Do you realize that? We don't really stop to think about these things, but when somebody who we look at and we are happy at their downfall, at their calamity, what does that say about us? What does that say about our heart when that's our response? Boy, let such a thing be far from us. Most of the time, most Christians I know are devastated at someone else's fall. They are saddened by that, and that is the right response, even if it's the person who's hurt us the most. That's when we know our heart is in the right place. But why is it that we should be very careful of this? Notice what he says at the end, because God will punish those that celebrate calamity. How many of us want the harsh discipline? Not me. I'll be happy to have my heart be right and soft. Verse 6, children's children are the crown of old men, and the glory of children is their father. Excellent speech is not becoming to a fool, much less lying lips to a prince. A present is a precious stone in the eyes of its possessor. Wherever he turns, he prospers. He who covers a transgression seeks love, but he who repeats a matter separates friends. Rebuke is more effective for a wise man than 100 blows on a fool. An evil man seeks only rebellion. Therefore, a cruel messenger will be sent against him. Solomon wore the crown of the monarchy, but to have grandchildren was a more enduring blessing than that. And here again is that theme of the home. It's not your children, it's your grandchildren. It's treating your children in a way that you're lifting them up and training them so that they train godly offspring. That's what Solomon's saying. That's the crown. That's when you know legacy is being passed down generationally. I can hardly imagine the judgment that is due to this nation and all others that see children as a curse. How awful and damnable is the spirit that looks at children as dispensable and disposable. Abortion is a vile stain on the face of this planet, especially when God teaches us to see them as a crowning glory. I don't think, by the way, that this is a coincidental thing that we have a baby in the room today. Precious, precious child. I know sometimes when we're moms and dads of babies at that age, we may not feel that way because we like sleeping. And they don't care for sleep. They want to eat. We understand. But you see the Bible's perspective. Solomon, King Solomon, the wisest guy in the whole world, his perspective on what is valuable. Children's children, grandchildren that walk with him. But then look at the difference of perspective as it pertains to fathers. Solomon writes that the glory of children is their father. Or as the NIV translates it, parents are the pride of their children. Not when they're teens, by the way. Can you park me here, Dad? Anna, we're in another county. I know, it's still too close to Rev, right? But imagine the world adopting this as their philosophy. Even better yet, imagine us parents living in such a way as to live up to this proverb. Perhaps it's best to focus on the glory of our Father. He's always right, and his love is never diminished. He's the glory of his children. And when fathers and mothers focus on him, they'll generally be parents that generate praise. Solomon pivots. Having talked about the honor of fathers, he now turns and returns to the subject of fools. Eloquence, fine speech shouldn't be granted to a fool. You shouldn't talk to a fool with finer speech. It's inappropriate. It's unbecoming. It's pointless. Any kind of speech you use at a fool is dumb. You shouldn't do that. It'd be like serving a hot dog on your most precious china. No offense to hot dogs. In the same way, lying lips should never be found on a person with royal pedigree. Rehoboam, are you listening? You shouldn't ever be one who lies. It should never be found on somebody who's a royal. And now you're thinking, well, we should be glad we're not of royal descent. Well, except we are. Peter tells us in the New Testament that you and I, you don't know this maybe it's been a while since we studied 1 Peter. 1 Peter 2 verse 9 tells us that you and I are a royal priesthood. Some of you were thinking, I was going to say a royal pain in the, no. Well, we're a royal priesthood. Paul relays to the church in Ephesus that we're to put off lying to one another. Why? Because we're members of one another. Ephesians 5:25. Solomon wants to convey that the priesthood of believers is filled with honest people that reflect the values of their God in the truth that they tell. And that brings us to verse 8 in a very strange sounding proverb. It sounds as if Solomon is praising the art of gift giving. The person who possesses a gift looks at it with great value. But that wouldn't fit the rest of the context. Both the KJV and the NKJV consider the idea of as a gift or as a present. The rest of the translations favor the concept of being a bribe. And in this case, we would agree. A bribe then, not a gift, not a present. A bribe is like a precious stone or even a stone of favor. Basically what Solomon is saying, it's like having a lucky charm. In this world, bribes open doors to the one that possesses it. Everywhere he goes, especially if he has a bribe in hand, he prospers. Now, is Solomon encouraging us to use money in that way, to bribe our way through life? It would appear that he's recognizing what has taken place in the world, not to glamorize it, but to expose it as a reality. Solomon's children might later have wondered, how did this person get to this position in his life? Solomon's words will have prepared them to understand that. But he's going to come back to the bribe in a few verses, so hold that in your mind. He continues to instruct them regarding the kinds of men that they would potentially encounter. For example, there are people that conceal transgressions. They seek love. Once again, the other translations provide additional clarity. This is not a person that hides someone's perpetual sin. This isn't about covering up for somebody in a terrible thing that they've done to others. This is about forgiving those who have committed a fault against you. personally. Now, why do they do this? Why do people do this? It's their desire to see love win. They're giving love the chance to flourish and to win the day. Now, I've watched this many times over my career, as it were, and I've admired the ones that have made the choice to pursue love despite their feelings to the contrary and their rights biblically. Those are heroic stories to me. People that can give such leeway to people who have sinned against them. It's powerful to watch. And I don't know if you've ever seen that before. I hope you all have at least one or two people in your life that you've watched forgive great areas of sin. But you'll notice that Solomon doesn't limit this to just a simple or a given area of relationship. Why is that? It's because forgiveness is necessary in every arena. Whether this occurs in family relationships, friendship, partnership, or in marriage, forgiveness is key. When we think about the biblical data regarding forgiveness, we might make reference to Peter's equation, which led to the Lord's rebuke, not merely 7 times, but 70 times 7. And you hope Peter wasn't too much of a fool and added it up to 490 and said, okay, well, that's the limit right there. No, the point is God doesn't want you to think about that. He doesn't want you to think about or limit your forgiveness in the face of repeated offense. We might also think of the Lord's words upon the cross when he looked to the ones that were crucifying him. It was there he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And what an important thought that is. Forgiving people because they don't know what they're doing. Even if they think that they know what they're doing, they have no idea the depth of what they're doing. They have no idea the implications that that's going to have for their lives or the life that you're experiencing. They do not know what they do. Jesus said that in the midst of his pain, while people were spitting on him, while they were mocking him, forgive them, for they know not what they do. We might also think, and this is a favorite story of mine, the story of the man he'd been forgiven, a colossal debt that he could not pay. He begged his master to let him go, and he would eventually repay the entire debt. Amazingly, in the story, the master just took the debt off the roll. He released him and allowed him to go. That kind of grace was unheard of. And it's barely a line later that man encountered another man that owed him the equivalent of sandwich money. He had that man jailed until he could pay what he owed the initial man. And when the master heard this, he was furious with the man that he had forgiven. Jesus completes the story in this manner. This is Matthew 18, verse 32. Then his master, after he had called him, said to him, "You wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you begged me. Should you not also have had compassion on your fellow servant, just as I had pity on you?" And his master was angry and delivered him to the torturers until he should pay all that was due him. So my heavenly Father will do to you if each of you from his heart does not forgive his brother his trespasses. Peter will later tell the Ephesians that they were to forgive one another just as Christ had forgiven them. Ephesians 4:32. God has forgiven you and I of an eternal debt. Who has harmed you more than you have offended God? Seek love. God is not looking for people who are constantly bringing up another's fault. And this isn't a story of perfect forgiveness. We can't do that. we tend to bring things back up and we get backed into a corner. We tend to use that as fuel when we're in the middle of an argument. That's completely unbiblical and unwarranted. And when you have a temptation for that, once again, refining pot for the gold, right? For the silver, furnace for gold, temptation, trial, that fight shows you where you're at. And if you are prone to go back to history and bring that up into the present, you got to be thoughtful that that's not seeking love. That is poisoning forgiveness when history is more important than the present. God is not looking for people who are constantly bringing up another's faults. A person like that only separates friends. God is looking for his people to remain connected and at peace with one another so long as it depends on you. Now, what we've just reviewed may sting a bit. The closer we are to our case, the more difficult it is to swallow the truths that have just confronted us. If you're a wise man, that gentle rebuke from his heart to yours will have its effect. On the other hand, you could beat a man 100 times who has decided that there's no God at all, and all you're going to get are sore hands. In other words, how you respond to the Lord is what you are. So what we just talked about, right? Forgiveness, here's the test. I have my case. This person did this to me. And I don't want to seek love. In fact, I want to seek their death. Let's be honest. I want them eradicated. Calamity. So there's our flesh. That's what our flesh thinks. And when God shows us the picture of what it is to forgive, it's that moment of gentle correction because he's just said it to us generally. If I receive that and decide to walk in that, I'm a wise person. If I hold on to my case, to my aggression, to my anger, and my way, I'm a fool. That's the difference. That's where the test is. Evil men, evil people have no desire to submit to God on that level. They're rebels through and through. And when that's the state of your heart, look at what he says. A merciless angel will be dispatched to end your rebellion once and for all. What does that mean? Commentators have mentioned that this could refer to anything from law enforcement to a literal death angel. Whew! I'm inclined to invoke the phrase, once again, harsh discipline. Think about it. This is soft discipline. When we're reading the word together and it stings your heart and you hear what is being said and you're receiving it and you have a choice to act upon it or not. That is gentle discipline. That is laboratory discipline. That is clean room discipline. But if we don't do that, it gets harder and harsher. And there are death angels and merciless angels involved. I don't want to get them involved. The wicked are certainly in for it. But let me give you one quick illustration Don McClure gave to me many, many years ago. He was talking about driving from one place to another. He was going to speak somewhere. And along the road, he was speeding along because he was late to get there. And he saw somebody get pulled over. And, he kind of drove, kept going by, still driving kind of fast. And then he saw another person get pulled over. He's like, oh, that's interesting. I'd rarely see that. And then finally he got pulled over. And he thought afterward, he goes, the Lord was preparing me. He was showing me the error of my way as I was going. All of a sudden there were a cop. Oh, I should have thought. I should have thought to slow down. God is doing the same thing every time we come up to a passage and it affects you personally, whether it's forgiveness or whatever it might be. He's doing the same thing. You get to watch it in someone else's life. And if you've ever had those lights come on behind you, and I know a guy who's had that happen a couple of times in his life, it's a horrible, horrible feeling. It doesn't matter how nice your legs are. They're not going to let you off. I found that out the hard way. No, I'm kidding. but the idea, we'll have to eat later. I know. Anyway. But the idea is that you get a chance to live through the Word and see something that is against what God does or how He wants us to act. That's us watching somebody else get a ticket. How many times do we have to see that roll before we get a ticket? Well, we won't get a ticket if we respond to the gentle wisdom. Those who are wicked won't have it at all. Solomon has repeated the sentiment throughout Proverbs. There's no hope for the wicked. There's no good outcome for those that rebel against the Lord of all the earth. And whether it's a big rebellion, like you and I might think, oh man, they're partying and they're drinking and they're whatever. That's what we would think of as big rebellion, right? Sex, drugs, rock and roll, that whole deal. But gosh, if we won't forgive, it still puts us on the wrong path. We might think of that as a respectable sin. It's still a sin. The pride of withholding forgiveness, saying, like Jesus was saying, you're not getting it. What I've forgiven you of is greater than what anyone else on this earth can ever do to you. So forgiving them is still necessary, and not forgiving is sin. I don't want to have a rebellious heart toward the Lord in any area. I hope you don't either. So you might be saying, well, wait a minute. It's not possible. You don't understand this person. Yeah, you're right. I don't. I have my own people that you don't understand. I know who does understand. And only He can affect that in my heart. So all I have to do is say, God, I'm willing. Change that in me. As I see it rise up, change it. When that happens, it's my turn to say, God, I want this to be different. I don't want to have this response. And you know what? God is faithful to do that when we surrender it, when we don't want to act like ourselves. It's a good thing to pray that. Verse 12, let a man meet a bear robbed of her cubs rather than a fool in his folly. Whoever rewards evil for good, evil will not depart from his house. The beginning of strife is like releasing water. Therefore, stop contention before a quarrel starts. As a person who spends a little time in the wild, it is a nightmare scenario to run into a mama bear ever. Just seeing one with her bear cubs in tow, that's frightening enough. To see one that is watching her cubs in danger and you're the cause of it would be sheer terror. Solomon believes that you and I would be better off in that scenario than meeting a fool in his folly. Now, the idea revolves around confrontation. It'll be a long night or afternoon for such a person. Standing up for principles that you believe in and confronting error when you see it is noble. A fool who would be injurious toward you, either in word or deed, would be asking for trouble. Solomon tells us that we might walk away with the bruises, but his home will be filled with trouble. Now, is this some kind of teaching on karma? No, it's much more consistent with what we call sowing and reaping. Imagine the goodwill that goes into having to meet a fool and be the buffer between him and a group of people. If he will abuse and ignore goodness, what will stop his downward slide? When you sow wickedness in the face of goodness, you will reap wickedness, because wickedness will not stop you. It will only encourage you. What we have just seen reminds me of the dangers that we face as we walk upon this earth. There are moments that we cannot avoid, and people will only make matters worse sometimes. I don't know if you've found that to happen in public, when you've walked into something and someone is going off in a public place and you have a chance to be a voice of reason, and boy, it is an ugly thing to be a part of. Wisdom demands that when possible, you and I do what we can to diffuse tense situations before they erupt. Every contention that has ever occurred on earth started small, and it became great. I think about how many long family fights there have been over something so stupid and silly that no one can really remember. I remember talking to people who were in marriage counseling that came to us at the packing house, and they would talk about how they were fighting, and many times they would report this. These are Christian people. They would report in the middle of the night, they didn't even remember what they were fighting about initially, because they had just been fighting. They fought all night, and they don't even remember what it was that started it. And then when they finally remember what it was that started it, they're like, that was really stupid now that I'm saying it out loud. And if you've ever had a marital fight, you know. It's true. I wish I could tell you. No, I don't. I've maybe one or two. Usually she fights with me anyway. But anyway, my point is, okay, I fight back a little bit. It's small. Anyway, there's a lot of freedom I have. Days like today, she's over there and I'm here. But I do find that her relatives are in the room, so I don't know. She might find out. And hopefully, what stays here, anyway, what's said here stays here. But point is that every one of those things started out small. So Solomon likens it to when water is released behind a dam. Before long, you would have a lake before you. You start out with a little trickle, and then it's a stream, and then it's a lake. Stop the dam before it gets out of control. If it is up to you, put a stop to it as early as possible. But notice that I said, if it is up to you. Why do I say that? It's not always up to you, is it? There are times when we're around people, I don't know what gets into them. They see family, they feel like it's time to act a fool. And the only way to stop them is 100 blows. No, it won't work. Trust me. The 100 blows won't help them. As much as it's possible that you have control, you settle the conflict and the quarrel before it takes on a life of its own. How do we do that? We choose humility. And we confess to whatever fault we have in the matter as early as possible. We want to be gentle and we want to be kind with our words. We want to offer grace and mercy. Most of us will be happier if we commit to that. Most of the time. Trust me though, I know what Solomon is saying to us, and I remind you again, these are general principles. We cannot absolutize them and make sure that we're saying that, we just follow this formula and it all works out. Not in a fallen world. But generally speaking, this is our job. Why should I be the first to change? Because you're the only one that's possible. You've heard the word. You've received his wisdom. So right now in that moment, you're the only one that has the ability to change. That other person, you need to wait for them to get that revelation. And they may not get it, depending on what church they go to, or if they go to church at all. They may not value Christ in any way. So the only ones that have the ability are the spiritual ones. That's not fair. Grace isn't fair. What do you want me to say? These are the things that God has put us in. And he gives us the ability to do these things, to act this way, because he calls us to. Remember, he wouldn't call us to if he wouldn't give us grace to do. Who's looking forward to their next family gathering just by these verses? Who can't wait? Who can't wait to just go find a fool in their folly? How many of you would just rather go find a mama bear? I would. I'll take the mama bear. I get it. Verse 15. He who justifies the wicked and he who condemns the just, both of them alike are an abomination to the Lord. Why is there in the hand of a fool the purchase price of wisdom, since he has no heart for it? A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. A man devoid of understanding shakes hands in a pledge and becomes surety for his friend. He who loves transgression loves strife, and he who exalts his gate seeks destruction. He who has a deceitful heart finds no good, and he who has a perverse tongue falls into evil. When you read the Old Testament, you quickly discover that the Lord loves justice. I just finished Exodus chapter 20 and following. I finished the book of Exodus just the other day. And it's just so many times that God says in his law, and he must love it so much because of all the things that he lays out for the people of Israel. Our Western rules of jurisprudence are found upon the principles set forth in the Mosaic law. Naturally, if anyone dares to pervert justice, it's a reprehensible act in God's sight. God is righteous and just in all of his ways. Any betrayal of that standard is vile in his sight. And what makes this worse, as if a miscarriage of justice wasn't enough, is the fact that to make judgments like this is a sign of a judgment that's coming upon a nation. When Israel was moving ever closer towards judgment, Isaiah proclaimed woe over the nation for their endorsement of evil over good. Isaiah 5 verse 20. When a nation can no longer distinguish between the two and the predominant choice is evil over good, that nation is close to judgment. Now, how many of you think we're very close? Here we are in what's supposedly, I just call it June, but some people call it Pride Month. I don't know many people who do that. I'm grateful for that. I wish the Lord and his blessing would turn them from their sin, but there is nothing but celebration of that which God calls abominable. From top to bottom. We talked about abortion earlier. That's enough. There are more aborted babies than there were Holocaust victims. Think of that. How many millions of people have died just as a result of birth control? And then think about this alphabet mafia that continues to hoist itself upon us to normalize behaviors that God calls sick. And when a nation chooses that over righteousness, they're in trouble, big time. Solomon pivots from a nation of foolish people to the fool himself. This is an interesting proverb. Solomon takes note of a fool who is seemingly prepared to purchase wisdom. So in other words, he's walking down the street and he has the price for wisdom in his hand. It doesn't make any sense to him because this is a total waste of time. He has no desire to buy it. He has no desire for wisdom. It doesn't make any sense. Wisdom is costly. It's available to everybody, but if you really don't want it, it's wasted on you to try to obtain it. Verse 17 is one of the most famous proverbs. A friend loves at all times. A friend is loyal and true in good and bad times. They're consistent in their presence. In other words, they're there at all times, whether it's good times for you or bad times. And building upon the theme, the friend is more likely to be like family when difficult moments arise. What a joy it is to have a friend like this. Ultimately, our Lord Jesus is the embodiment of this verse. By the Spirit, the Lord sticks closer to you and I than any other person can. He sympathizes with our weakness. He knows our pain. You might be a good friend if you stand by your friend's side. But for you and I, there are also boundaries that you should consider. Now, Jesus can be our friend in ways that we cannot be other people's friends. He's absolutely holy. He's all-powerful. He'll never be compromised. He never has to worry about looking bad for doing the wrong thing. You and I, we are not any of those things. We have to be careful of our reputation. We have to be careful of our temptations. Remember, what does Jude say? Save them with fear. In other words, be careful who you're going to reach out to, because you could get burned yourself. So we have to be careful of those things. You know, when Marta asked us to come to the raves some years ago, I had to put myself right in the trailer with all the other guys. It's not a safe place for me to be, with people running around without clothes on, whatever else. That's just not a good place for me. For you, it might be a bar. That wouldn't bother me at all. I could walk into a bar and sit there for hours. I wouldn't drink a thing. I don't drink. Doesn't bother me. Throw drugs in front of me. Not going to be an issue. That might be a problem for you. So boundaries are very important. Even though you want to be a friend that loves at all times, you also have to match that with your godliness. How are you walking with the Lord? Is this right for me to walk with the Lord? Can I be in that environment? And if you are honest with yourself, there's some environments you cannot be in. And you have to know what those are. You have to know what those venues are that you can't walk in, and situations you can't be a part of. So Solomon gives this idea to us, right? He says to us, and this is from the beginning of the book, you're a fool still. It's like it hasn't changed. You're still a fool if you agree to be your friend's financial security. If your friend is somebody who's always needing money, you can't be the one that gives it. You can't put yourself in the position to be drained with your account because they can't keep their account. Solomon says, don't do it. But a friend loves at all times, is closer than a brother. You're still a fool if you sign and co-sign on somebody's life. Rehoboam, don't be a fool. CCFians, don't be a fool. If your friend loves to step over the line all the time, he's headed for a life of contention. Why would a person act that way? Well, they trust in what they've built. Notice that phrase, he has high walls. Is God against high walls? Build them short? No. Scholars are divided by what this might mean. He may have high walls to prove he is better than his neighbors. So he's making high walls to show the world that's watching, I am better than everybody else. Or he may be building high walls because he knows he needs protection. That to me makes a lot more sense, given what we just saw about what we're learning here. Somebody who steps over the line. So if you step over the line all the time, you need a lot of defense. Does that make sense? So be careful of the friend who needs greater defense for his obvious great offense in life. Be careful of the ones with high walls. And you also want to beware of the friend with a deceitful heart. That's the same word we've encountered previously, someone who's twisted. We can be assured that such a person will not succeed in any venture that they begin. So when you tie yourself to somebody who is twisted in their way of thinking, you're tying yourself to an anchor in the sea. If they're willing to speak out perversely, they're well on their way to ruin. So there are boundaries that you and I need to place over the friendship we would have. Friend sticks closer than a brother, but not so close that they get drowned in the sin that brother's in. Verse 21, he who begets a scoffer does so to his sorrow, and the father of a fool has no joy. A merry heart does good, like medicine, but a broken spirit dries the bones. A wicked man accepts a bribe behind the back to pervert the ways of justice. Wisdom is in the sight of him who has understanding, but the eyes of a fool are in the ends of the earth. Oh, it's terrible to bear a scoffer. Now, you won't be able to test if you are having one. Scoffing won't be detected on an ultrasound. You don't get it. You don't get to have, this is a scoffer when they're putting the, thing over the top. Oh, scoffer. Oh no, we're in for trouble. But someone who bears a child who becomes arrogant, boastful, there's going to be great heaviness with that. Parents who find that their children are fools have no joy, at least when it comes to that particular child or children. In other words, when that child is named, there's very little to celebrate spiritually. Now, many of you probably know what this means. And that feeling. And we've talked about what a fool is. A fool is somebody who doesn't think that they have any accountability to God. And when they live their life that way, and you watch it as a parent, it is difficult to live with that. I want to remind you, those of us who have prodigals, I want to remind you, God has prodigals. You might want to blame yourself for what you did or didn't do. I should have made them watch more VeggieTales, whatever it might be. I remind you that God never did anything wrong. He did all the best for his people. And there are millions of prodigals today. He did all the right things. And they still prodigaled, for lack of a better term. So what do you do when this is the case? When you have a child who's a fool? You love them for who they are. You celebrate what you can, and you pray for the Lord's mercy to prevail over their foolishness. Once again, I can't confirm to you that this is what the context is about, but I find it apropos that the next proverb follows when it comes to a wayward son or daughter. Notice, a merry heart does one good. And I can attest to the fact that nothing in this world compares to the heart that is full of joy. There's no greater joy than to watch a fool of a child become wise in their faith. Nothing better than that. There's no better medicine than that. At the same time, God knows what it means for parents to stare out onto the horizon, proverbially speaking, night after night. Their broken spirit is akin to drying bones that have no strength to hold them up. And on those nights and at those times, regardless of the cause, remember that the Lord holds and comforts us. Our part is not to abandon our post. Watch and pray. Look for any sign of change and wait for any opportunity to speak God's truth to them in love. I think it's profound that when the prodigal son did return, and this is the prodigal that left, not the prodigal that stayed, when the prodigal that was coming home, before he saw the father saw him. What does that tell us? That means as parents who are walking with the Lord and our children are not, we have to be the ones watching for them because they won't see us coming. Solomon places the actions of the wicked man before us here as he again decries the attempts that men make to subvert justice. Bribery has always been an offense toward justice. Notice the clarity here. We talked about it earlier. It is wicked to offer a bribe, but it's just as wicked to take one. A person in either possession has shown that they have no wisdom. They've lost sight of her. What is meant by the expression here that the eyes of the fool wander? It could either mean that they are eluding detection by looking all around. You know how people are like that when there's trouble? When there's somebody who's doing something wrong, they're always kind of like shifty in their eyes. They're always, looking here, there, everywhere. That could be one interpretation. The other is that they have a far-off plan that they're trying to fulfill with their mischievousness, their criminality now. So they're not looking at what they're doing now. They're thinking about it for a future time when they're going to have all this money and they're going to finally give up this life of crime and go straight. At issue is the fact that they're not looking at the presence of the eyes that watch them now, the eyes of God. Only a fool would let their eyes wander toward any action without eyes to their present consequences. Verse 25 to the end, a foolish son is a grief to his father and bitterness to her who bore him. Also, to punish the righteous is not good, nor to strike princes for their uprightness. He who has knowledge spares his words, and a man of understanding is of a calm spirit. Even a fool is counted wise when he holds his peace. When he shuts his lips, he's considered perceptive. Verse 25 repeats the sentiment of verse 21. Grief and bitterness belong to the parents of foolish offspring. What do you do with that grief and bitterness? You bring it to Jesus. Call upon the Lord at every reminder. Petition the throne of grace and stand your ground looking out on the horizon for the prodigal to return. It doesn't matter what kind of punishment you put a fool through, but there should never be punishment for the righteous. In this world, such injustice, Solomon tells us, is terrible. Striking a prince refers to whipping, giving stripes. In other words, whipping a righteous prince for their uprightness is not good according to God. So imagine what heaven thought when the ultimate righteous one was whipped and torn to pieces. Yet that pleased the Lord because of what Jesus was accomplishing for his people. Justice was being meted out against Jesus Christ on behalf of all who would believe upon him. Otherwise, a world that practices injustice is being prepared for judgment itself. Notice these phrases here. I know you're going to love this. What is great about a person with great knowledge? The thing is, they don't have to display it. A knowledgeable person knows when to keep his words to a minimum. That tells you everything you need to know about me. That guy's a fool. My pastor often said to me back in the day, if you only knew what I didn't say, you'd be impressed. At the same time, I remember times when he and I listened to other preachers, and he would say at times, at least I didn't say that. The point is, knowledge is best served at the right time for the right purpose. Additionally, you can identify a man with understanding who is endowed with a calm spirit. In the original, the word can also be translated excellent. And if you would take a quick look at the other translations, you would find that they translate this word with words like a cool head, a cool spirit, or being even-tempered. Now, when we're talking about contention, strife, and family difficulty, and prodigals, and communication with kids, and all those kinds of things, in the world of quick social media takes, these are the qualities that are necessary. If we're going to have peace in our home, if we're going to have an ability to bring our kids, or at least not keep them from coming back to the Lord, we have to be ones of restraint, knowing when to share something and when not to. How many of you thought of the greatest things to say in the middle of the night to your kids? And then when you see them, you're like, the Lord says, don't you dare say that. You'll ruin everything. If you haven't had that experience yet, you will. It's an awful thing to have all these great things to say, but know that knowledge means you don't say it. That you instead are a person of a calm heart. That takes so much restraint. It takes so much trust in the Lord because you want to control. And guess what? You can't control a human soul. These are the qualities that lead to wisdom. I hope you've noticed as we've studied through Proverbs, you need to hear this over and over again. Wisdom demands restraint from our mouths, hearts, and spirits. Solomon closes on this thought because he wants you to hear what happens when someone sees you silent. Imagine if a fool would keep his mouth shut. People might be fooled into thinking that he was wise. If he was quiet and just furrowed his eyes a little while tilting his head, the world might even believe that he was perceptive. And it's amazing when we're talking about with kids and families and trauma and trouble in the homes, how if we just stayed silent, maybe the Lord would do something on the other side as we looked as though we knew what to say, even if we didn't. That's the lesson for us. That's good counsel in any area, in any era, for any of us who are walking in contention. So what do we do with all this today? There's a lot here, isn't there? There's a lot to think about. What do I need to pray through? What I need to know is I need to understand that God feels what I'm feeling. He sympathizes with me. He has a plan. He's in control. I have to trust him. I need to do what I need to do to have peace in my home. I need to do what I need to do in terms of speaking the truth in love or not saying anything at all. And I need to know the wisdom of the difference of when those times are happening. Restraint is better than blowing up on people. Because even when you're quiet, they'll think you're perceptive. There's a lot here for us. But none of it matters if we're not willing to forgive. If we're not willing to say, Jesus died so that God could forgive me of an eternal debt that I owed him. How could I hold it against them? Oh, may the Lord give us wisdom to receive the gentle rebuke, because harsh discipline is terrible, and none of us want it.